There was like really a lot of people.
Kevin told me you were sitting over here.
I
asked him if y'all were okay. He said, yeah. I said, well, she's sitting over there. So
was like, oh, Charlie, man. I guess they split up.
No, hey, what y'all were doing is practicing not having an assigned pew. That's good. That's good homework.
I don't know if I can do that. Maybe better communicate.
hey, you been moving around.
Hey, we move around like you guys do. We move from the second row on this side to the second row.
Not much of a move.
Hey, wow.
And we really only do that to let people that want to be distant be distant.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would never move. Creature of habit.
Unless it was a visitor whose soul's in the balance. But
well, that would Of course, that goes unsaid.
All right, we're doing this in reverse, and this I didn't know what to expect. This is my first time that we're here during Lads Weekend, and it wasn't a pandemic, so I feel like we are down a little bit, but we got most of our class here.
If it were normal,
If
it were normal, there would be a lot less.
If there's more, it would be a lot less. Yeah, that makes sense.
There's I don't know how many. I know that they said there was 40 registered for the hospitality room. Kim and I done it. Even Russell Mann before. I think it was typical to have about 125.
Well, I asked him. He said the total is 71. We're going to be down today. It's usually 100, almost double that. So, yeah. But what we're doing today, and if anybody comes in late here and wants a sheet, I guess we'll just kind of keep our eyes peeled collectively there. We're talking about I'm calling the class. I don't know what it has on your sheet, but I make no apology for apologetics. A little bit of a play on words there. The word apology we think of as what? What does that word typically mean to us?
Saying sorry.
Yeah, saying we're sorry. In the Greek language, the word apologia was kind of transliterated, that is, brought into the English language, kind of like baptizo became baptism. And we use that term apologetics. Now, you've heard that, right? What does apologetics suggest to us?
A defense.
A defense. That's what the word literally means, to make defense, if it's a verb. And so what we're making a defense of in this 9-week period of April and May, we have the shortened quarter, is we're going to make a defense of the existence of God and of the inspiration of the Bible. Because I think that inasmuch as somebody's not ready to enter into our OBS or Open Bible Study or some other method that we talked about last time, the number one reason why, far and away, is because they're not convinced of the existence of God and the Bible being His revelation to us. I forgot to bring in, as a show and tell, how many of you are familiar with the Apologetic Study Bible? How many of you actually own that? We just we have a couple that's coming with us to church. I didn't see him here today, but the Tysons from the island of Dominica. Greg Neville got him a copy of that book. It comes in hardcover. I don't think it comes in any kind of. Does it now come? Is it leather bound or is it imitation or?
It's
bonded. Bonded. Okay. So it feels more like a Bible in your hand if you have it in that form. The guys that do that Bible are the guys from Apologetics Press. Now, a lot of times when you are doing or using a study Bible, what you'll have in a study Bible is footnotes and explanations and so forth. And a lot of these are put out by those who have some very strong, erroneous religious viewpoints on matters like whether or not we're born with Adam's sin, or whether or not Christ is going to come and reign on the earth for 1,000 years, what we call premillennialism. Or more often than not, they take the mainline view in religion of you're saved by faith alone. So you'll have their comments. And a lot of times the comments are, despite what this verse seems to say very plainly, it says something completely different. These men are uninspired, and they are subject to the same scrutiny that anybody else is. But I think you're going to find that they are, it is a tool that will help you to fortify your defense, your belief in the existence of God and the Scriptures as His Word. It's just necessary for me because I don't have the scientific smarts of those guys that I'm going to be consulting materials from, in our brotherhood at least, Apologetics Press, quite a bit. I'm also going to be looking at some other men like Norman Geisler, William Lane Craig, Lee Strobel, guys from the denominational world who really do a good job on some of the arguments and some of the points they want to make. So where we're going to start today is the existence of God. And by way of introduction, fact is that 87% of all children are getting their education in the public school system. That means different things in different localities. It is not an indictment, it's not a negative statement whatsoever. It is a fact. And it is also a fact that in such a setting that there is a standardized curriculum that is used in so many different places. And that curriculum comes from an established point of view. Now, Christian parents whose children are in the public school system, what they do is they come along behind that as they would do in any other area of life, and they are making sure what it is that what their children are being taught is consistent with what the Bible says. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And unfortunately, there are a great many who have unshaped minds, who live in homes that are not Christ-centered, that are not Bible-centered, and so they're easier prey for the point of view or the worldview that science takes when it comes, the science textbooks take when it comes to an explanation of how we got here, who we are, and ultimately then, by implication, where we're going. Now, if we were to describe the philosophical point of view of science textbooks on the whole in the public school system, and I don't have a crusade or anything like that that I'm grinding on. It's a fact. I mean, surely, and those we have several school teachers in here. You know it better than anybody, right? What is the point of view that is put forward in the textbooks and science about who we are, where we came from? Okay, evolution. So when I say evolution, what does that mean to us? What's a common standard idea of what we mean by evolution?
Things happen by chance.
Okay.
There's no intelligence. A
series of progressive happen chance, all right, that grew more complex to get us to where we are today. Now, not going to bog down in this too much. There are really two different divisions of evolutionists. There are those that would consider themselves to be theistic evolutionists, and there would be those who would consider themselves to be atheistic, a meaning without, like amoral, non, all right? So an atheist would be one who believes that there is no God, okay? One might kind of blur the lines a little bit more and call themselves an agnostic evolutionist. That's the wishy-washy. They don't know, is there a God, isn't there a God? They're not going to line up on that. Theistic evolutionists would say that everything happened by chance, and just the way we would describe that, but that God utilized that. Now, I think why that's done is to accommodate what is so often the standard point of view, the so-called academic or scientific point of view. That anybody with any kind of scientific credibility, this is what's often said, believes in evolution. And so those, even at times within our Christian colleges, those who are in the science department don't want to seem foolish to their peers. And so they will say, they will try to accommodate the geologic timetable and say that God did that. He set it in motion. Now, that's not going to be our point in the whole today. We're going to address that. There is no need to make that accommodation at all. And I don't believe that you can take the Bible literally and embrace that. Now, when it comes to evolution, the philosophical worldview. So worldview, I promise we're going to get a lot easier. I don't want to get too bogged down here. A worldview is a system of beliefs, the way one sees the world. It influences their behaviors, their mindset. And in fact, another word for worldview is a mindset. Now, theism is a worldview. Polytheism, many gods, is a worldview. When it comes to atheistic evolution, the worldview is naturalism. Okay? All right, so anybody want to take a stab at what naturalism means? What does it sound like? All right, it's going to happen. It's going to appeal to nature, relate to nature, things that happen naturally. What does that mean to the scientific community? Well, let me share something Jeff Miller has to say. He says the official doctrine that has been taught in the public school classrooms over the last few decades is naturalism, the belief that only the natural exists. So scientists will refer to that sometimes as the closed system, right? It's what's observable. It's what we have empirical evidence for. We can go into the laboratory, we can put it in a test tube, we can measure it, we can then write down our data and come out of that. And naturalism says that's all there is. We only are this enclosed system. There's nothing outside of that system. And so when we get to the laws of thermodynamics, they apply where? To the natural world, right? The universe, everything that's in there. Now, naturalism also means that no supernatural phenomena such as creation, the global flood of Noah, or biblical miracles occurred. Strict naturalism, that's what that means. It's only what has happened through that process of complex changes that we call evolution. And so naturalistic evolution is pressed on the minds of, as it is a lot of things, on children from a very young age. And if there is no discriminating or offsetting or counteracting force at home, then there's an uncritical check of that kind of thinking that starts at the earliest of ages and continues on to adulthood. And of course, we know in the public domain, there's nothing in the public sphere that's going to check that point of view. In fact, it promotes that point of view. A 2017 Gallup poll revealed that 19% of Americans today believe in naturalistic evolution. That's 1 in 5. Now, there have been times in the past when we've had our young people who've been exposed to denominationalism or liberalism. And by liberalism, it might mean the denying of miracles or denying of the virgin birth, those kinds of things. And when our young people in the past have been exposed to that, what do we do in our Bible curriculum? We address it, right? You know, I talk about some of those things in the footnotes and the margins of the Bible and how those things aren't true. Well, what we'll do is we'll come along and say, now, I know that there are people who in religion X, Y, or Z or in this particular mindset say this, and here's what the Bible actually says about that. Got two problems with naturalism and that approach. If we wait until, if we're not preventative and proactive, and we're having to be reactive, you know what we also have to do? We'll look at 2 Timothy 3, 16 and 17. All Scripture is what? It's given by inspiration, meaning God breathed. All right, it was breathed out through the writers, and everything. It gives us everything we need for. No, that's 2 Peter 1:3. All Scripture given by inspiration of God is profitable for doctrine, reproof, for correction, instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be thoroughly furnished, complete, furnished unto every good work. But what if I don't believe that there's a God? And if I don't believe there's a God, what am I going to believe about this book? Not from God. And so it's important for us to step back from that. And now you're going to find, I just quoted a Bible verse in Bible class saying what I'm about to say. Is it possible for us to begin this dialogue before we get to book chapters and verses? I think we have to. And one of the ways we do that is philosophically, is by talking about proofs for the existence of God. Are there proofs apart from the Bible that would lead us to the most logical conclusion, and that is that we were created by an intelligent being who is not subject to the natural laws. He operates outside of that sphere. And so the first and second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply to him. The idea that there is no effect without an adequate cause, that deals with the natural order. He exists outside of that. So he has a completely different set of laws. But that's okay. We can reconcile that when we talk about the fact that the universe, the natural order, cannot be eternal because of the natural laws, the laws of thermodynamics. We'll say more about that. All right. But let me say this before I get to the individual arguments. Psalm 111 in verse 2 says, "Great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all those who delight in them." And I only point that out to you to say that the Bible itself deals with a lot of different disciplines in science. I'm just going to give you a little short list. Job 9, verse 9. Astronomy. You know, names of stars that we still use today, like Orion and Pleiades. God named the stars. It's interesting. Go back and try to find the etymology, the beginning of that. You don't find it in civilization. Somebody goes, okay, we're going to name this Orion and Pleiades. God named them, and that's been their name for thousands of years. That's pretty cool. Cosmology. Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God. And we're going to look at just how that does that in one of our arguments today. Geology. Job 12 and verse 8. In Job 38 through 41, you remember Job wants an audience with God, and God finally appears to him out of the whirlwind. And basically, it's a bunch of where were you when I? And it goes all the way through 4 chapters. Incidentally, and again, this is from Miller, says that God repeatedly uses creation to teach Job about himself through disciplines. And I know you can't get all this down, but this is pretty overwhelming. Physics. So here's what you can do. You can go home, open up Job 38 through 41, and see if you can find all these different scientific disciplines that God weighs in on with Job. Physics, oceanography, palmology. Anybody teach science? What is palmology? I'm thinking of Palmolive, but it's P-O-M-O. Palmology. I don't know. Palmology. You know, pomology. All right. I don't know what that is. Optics, meteorology, and biology. And in biology, he deals with zoology, ornithology, entomology, herpetology, botany, and marine biology. It's not even the purpose of why God is answering Job. It's just incidental truth that comes out while he's answering that. Now, I'm not trying to equip you to know a lot about these disciplines. Just to show you that God was not caught off guard by the phenomenon of the last 50, 60 years to try to discredit him and remove him from the public marketplace of the Western world. He's given us kernels of truth, but he's also given us philosophy, a mind to be able to intelligently discern and to make judgments. So here's where we get to that. I'm going to give you, I think, 6 arguments, and this is just kind of an overview. All right? The first is the moral argument. The moral argument. And the moral argument, very basically defined, is that humans intuitively know that objective moral values exist. Humans intuitively know that objective moral values exist. Right? Like what?
Are you asking, like, why am I here? Where am I going?
No, objective moral values.
Like it's bad to kill people.
Yeah. That's probably one that is the most defensible. But you don't need but one, but there's a bunch of others, right? Like the whole beating people and rape and robbery and all of that. We just inherently say, it ain't right. But murder especially, right? It is treacherous, it is wrong, it is violent. Where did that come from? What is it? Now, because naturalistic evolution, especially as it was espoused by Darwin and all the disciples came after him, tell us what about human survival?
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. Is that a moral? Is that an objectively moral point of view? Yes and no. I mean, it is an objective moral value. It's a deplorable value, but it is one that says basically if I can take it from you, if I can hurt you, if I have to kill you to get it, then I'm going to get it. That is survival of the fittest in its moral conclusion, right? If we are just by chance here, and there is no supernatural moral value system that exists outside of the natural world, if I can get it, I'm going to get it, and you can't stop me, and it's not wrong, because there is no right and wrong. It's pretty scary. Fortunately, those who believe this only give lip service to it. They don't really believe that there is no objective set of morals, except for a guy named Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler believed in natural selection and Darwinism. History is replete with references of that. He said, nature is cruel, therefore we can be cruel too. But most people don't want the consequences of that philosophy. Why? Because of two things. Number one, the atheist must argue that moral law, that is right and wrong, is subjective, that it is defined by humanity, and they don't want to do that. But if moral law is objective, then moral law is above humanity and requires an author that is also above humanity. Do you see how that's the case? If we're talking about something that is not found in the natural world, but it exists apart from it, then we've got to admit that there's a realm, a being that exists outside of the natural world. But otherwise, you're saying that we get to decide, that murder is subjective, that robbery, that rape, that all of that is just whatever we think it is. And there's not a person on earth that wants to live in that kind of a world, including the atheist who believes in naturalistic evolution. I found it very interesting. It's now been 15 years ago, but in November of 2006, several of the world's leading evolutionary scientists that consider themselves atheists gathered at La Jolla, California for the first Beyond Belief Symposium. And what they purported to do in those meetings was to replace religion with science. They were wanting to show that religion is superfluous, we don't need it, that science will do what so many people have relied upon religion to do. All right? So they called it Beyond Belief. Well, the next year at the Beyond Belief Symposium Part 2, a man named Edward Slingerland, who is the founder of the Center for the Study of Human Evolution, Cognition and Culture, made a statement in an interview. So he's gone there. What is he? He's an atheistic evolutionist. He is the head of a think tank that promotes evolution. So Edward Slingerland, you can look him up, Slingerland. He said, religion is not going away. Even those of us who fancy ourselves rationalists and scientists rely on moral values, a set of distinctly unscientific beliefs. Where, for example, does our conviction that human rights are universal come from? Human rights, to me, are as mysterious as the Holy Trinity. You can't do a CT scan to show where human rights are. And you can't cut open somebody and show us their human rights. It's not an empirical thing. What's an empirical thing? Test tubes, laboratory, beakers. Measure it out, boil it up, and get to the conclusion. It's not an empirical thing. It's just something we strongly believe. It's a purely metaphysical, apart from, not just physical, entity. It's just something we strongly believe. You know what the Bible word for that is?
Faith.
Faith. So basically, the Slingerland says, we got to have faith in something. There's no God, but we want these moral values to exist. All right, so the question would be then, how do you get to that conclusion? According to atheism, man is nothing but matter in motion. That's all that man is. How can the atheist logically call anything atrocious, deplorable, or evil or wicked? And so the fact that humans can even contemplate morality is a conundrum for the evolutionists. How is it that we're even processing and thinking that way? Atheistic evolution cannot explain morals. Real objective right and wrong cannot exist if humans are the offsprings of animals. This doesn't work. Young people may be told, I don't think it would be said this way, are asked not to or led not to act like animals in the classroom, and yet they're told all the time that they descended from animals. Now, for those of you that like philosophy, the moral argument in a syllogism, used to be major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. If the major premise is true and the minor premise is true, then the conclusion must be true. All that's happened in philosophy now is they call it premise 1, premise 2. Same thing, all right? Here's the moral argument in a syllogism. Premise 1, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Why? It's not built into the evolutionary model. It's not at all. If there is nothing transcendent outside of this closed system, then there is no reason for moral law objectively to exist. It's get what you can, as you can, while you can. Premise number 2, objective moral values exist. True or false? Murder, robbery, theft, in all societies. Therefore, philosophically, logically, there's only one conclusion. God does exist. Okay? I want to say more about that. But let me share something with you that the evolutionary biologist William Provine said. So again, no friend to creation. He said, no inherent moral or ethical laws exist, nor are there absolute guiding principles for human society. The universe cares nothing for us, and we have no ultimate meaning in life. That's the logical conclusion of an amoral, atheistic, moral viewpoint. Not many people are going to have him come and do feel-good speeches or TED Talks or whatever, because that doesn't fly. Nobody wants to hear that because of the anarchy that would follow out of that. Atheists have got to either reject the truthfulness of the moral argument's first premise and illogically accept the idea that objective morality arose somehow from rocks and reptiles. Because with evolution, something has got to be eternal. And what they have said is it is not mind, it is not morality. It is matter. And so somewhere along the line, matter had to have evolved feelings, thoughts, and moral values. Now, I know that there's naturalistic explanations of synapses firing in the brain that is the root or the cause of, and not just intelligence, but moral values. But that really, we're going to look at some other arguments. You're going to have to go, man, you're talking about the faith it takes to believe in theism. The faith it's going to take, just as we get to the complex changes that occurred, that diverged, that gave us rocks over here and gave us ferns over here, gave us birds over here, and somehow gave us humans over here, all at a time in which it could sustain itself. Because if the plants are able to evolve in 6.3, but no, not that far back, maybe 1.6, no, it's not that far, 800 million years ago. Let's give them that. And then we got here 1 to 2 million years ago. We've got some problems with how things evolved and got there. We're going to talk about the vanilla bean if we have time. You know, the vanilla bean is going to require a plant and a bee to evolve in the same generation, and for that bee to figure out the enormously complex job of pollinating a vanilla pod. I can't wait to share that with you. All right. So what happens when people refuse to have God in their knowledge? Romans 1, 28 through 31. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. And then he goes to this list of all these different moral sins. Basically, what we see as the fruit of a society that has rejected God today. You can go through and look at the who's who of that. All right. The other arguments, I'm not going to go into as much detail. I'm going to just kind of give you the highlights on by design. The second argument is the intuitional argument. Humans are incurably religious. Our intuition tells us that God exists. Evolutionists say this should have been something that we got rid of early in the evolutionary process. Because you think about worship. What does worship involve? Sacrifice. All right? So we think in terms of sacrifice. That changes from place to place, but sacrifice of what?
Your time.
Your time and your money. That does not fit with the evolutionary model. That we should have cast that off. So why do we do that? And here's the thing. Is endemic beyond pandemic? Anybody know? It's beyond pandemic. It's built into everything. Now, wherever you go in this world, you're going to find in culture and civilization, they're not necessarily worshiping the God of the Bible, but they are worshiping as they have throughout civilization. Where did that come from? Evolution doesn't give us that. There is a feeling, a belief inside of humanity that there is a being greater than himself that demands his sacrifice of time and money. That's the intuitional argument. That very belief demonstrates that there's a God. And it's a philosophical argument. I'm not sure what the counter to that would be, but it's reasonable. Seems to be. Let me see. Number 3. I got moral argument, intuitional argument. The teleological argument. The existence of a poem implies what? A poet. Of a building implies a builder. A fingerprint, a finger. Engine, engineer, lawmaker. Design, a designer. All right, Hebrews 3:4. This is corroboration for those who believe. It's not to build the argument, right? Hebrews 3:4 says, it's a truth. I think we'd all agree with the statement. Every house is built by some man. What's the opposite of that? A house is built by no one. Nobody believes that. He who built all things is God. Romans 1:19 and 20 says, that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So when scientists discover evidence of planning, thought, intent, purpose, and complexity, what are they seeing? Evidence of design, right? If I see that there are plans on a draft table, what can I fairly well assume? There's an architect somewhere around there, or has been, or at least he dropped it off, right? If there is thought evident, and even it's most elementary, if you find a little sheet of paper sitting on the floor of somebody's house that says 1 + 1 = 2, as simple as that is, you realize that somebody, to some degree, has been exercising thought. They didn't just show up there, right? Intent, purpose, all the same. It shows design. Now, here's what Darwin said. If it can be demonstrated that any complex organ exists, which could not have possibly been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. All right, so let me give you this about the vanilla bean real quick. Vanilla grows up a tree as a vine. Eventually that vine produces an orchid. And in order to make the vanilla bean, the orchid must be pollinated. The problem is it only blooms one morning in the year, every year. If it is not pollinated within 12 hours, it withers. To make things more difficult, a hood-like membrane covers the part of the vanilla orchid which produces pollen. So in other words, if a creature comes along, it's not going to intuitively say, here's where I need to do this pollination. It's got this membrane that covers it up so it doesn't see it of itself. So that makes the production of the vanilla bean very difficult. The Mexican Melipona bee lands on the orchid, lifts up that little hood-like membrane, collects pollen, and then flies off to the next flower. This bee is pollinating the orchids. And after some time, the orchid produces a vanilla bean. It is the only insect that knows how to pollinate the vanilla orchid. The bee and the vanilla vine had to be made at the exact same time. Not to mention, this bee had to be given specific information about how to pollinate the vanilla orchid. Again, no other insect knows how to do this. This bee had to be made, designed, and purposefully created to pollinate the vanilla orchid and so produce vanilla. Think about that the next time you're eating vanilla pudding. That it's proof of the existence of God, not just the taste, but the process that gives you that. Evolution has no way to explain that. And by the way, there's a series out there, I don't know who does it, they're not members of the church. I don't even know how overtly religious they are, but it's amazing creatures that defy evolution. I think Sarfati is the name of the guy. There are so many things we could point to that evolution could not have produced. You think about a giraffe with its long neck, and you think about how it's got a circulatory system. And you think about how every time that giraffe leans down to take a drink, you know what should happen according to evolution?
Blackout.
It should, at the very best, black out. All that blood's doing what? Straight down to the head. If there's not some kind of stopper along the way to slow that down, that's going to be gross, because the eyeballs pop right out, right? And die. But it happened, right? The bombardier beetle. And what the beetle is able to do, let me give you a couple. Think about the woodpecker. You think about that woodpecker is pounding 12,000 times a day, 1,000 grams of force. How is it not brain dead in doing that? There's design. Oh, and just go look up the mantis shrimp and its punching speed. It can punch 50 times harder than we can reproduce per size. If it was the size of a human being, it would be destroying cities all over the place. It can punch faster than the blink of an eye by 50 times. Its punching power can kill and crack open a shell of a crab and an oyster just by the sound wave. It doesn't have to make impact. And it's designed in such a way that its punching mechanics has a spring and a coil mechanism that works like a hammer, just so that it can eat that part of the created world that it needs to live on to survive in the circle of life. And I promise you that there are a bunch more. How about the peregrine falcon and the katydid and its ability to camouflage? And there's so much more. I hadn't even talked about the human body and all the intricacies that are happening autonomous of us. I think Tom very well in the Gospel meeting talks about that. And think about how the heart is doing what it's doing so many times a minute for 70, 80, 90, 100 years. The circulatory system and how all that works. And the respiratory system. All of that happening without us having to think it to happen. We'd all be dead as babies. But God has it built in. And then there's the universe. And see, so this teleological argument, I think, if you could only use one argument for the existence of God, I think this one's powerful. But, look how strong the moral argument is. Really quick, the second bell's about to ring in. The aesthetic argument is very easy. According to atheism, man is nothing but matter in motion. So, how did beauty come about? And why do we call it beautiful? What in the evolutionary model gives us beauty? It's not necessarily the most functional thing. It's not the prime thing. And more can be said about that, but I want to get to the last two really quick. The ontological argument, we cannot conceive of qualities that do not exist in some being. It's a rather philosophical argument, but if you can conceive of omnipotence, omniscience, where do we find that in the natural world? How did we think of that? How did we come up with it? It is impossible to think up something that doesn't exist in some realm, and it does exist in God. And then the cosmological argument. This is where we get into the laws of thermodynamics. The universe exists, and it is an effect. Therefore, it must have an ultimate cause. It must have an adequate cause. It has to be a cause bigger than the effect. The causator has to be bigger than what you have as a result. And because this results, it has to come from something bigger. So you think about the laws of thermodynamics. The first law says that something cannot come from nothing. Or you take the Big Bang. You got to get all this stuff down to this little microdot or whatever it is, and in less than a second of time, it's going to expand out in this extreme, rapid place to fill in our universe. And that, let's grant that for a moment. But where did that come from? You still got matter eternal. And then you got the other problem, and that is that the universe is not expanding, it's wearing down, it's wearing out. And so it had to have a clock winder somewhere at the beginning that set it all in motion. Evolution would explain the opposite. It would be saying that we're ever expanding. It's not working that way. It's running down. Second law of thermodynamics. So, that's a cursory look at the 6 laws. Here's what I want you to do. I'd like for you to, between now and next Sunday, send me any questions that you have about that, because I'm usually more interactive in our dialogue. I wanted to talk about these, but I want to know what questions, what thoughts, what counter arguments that you've heard. Send those to me during the week. I'd like to say that I have the competency to just handle those as you shoot them to me in class. I might need to do a little bit of research, so I'll give you like a Thursday cutoff. If you send me, it's real easy. It's Mr. Neal Pollard at gmail.com, Mr. Neal Pollard at gmail.com, and I will deal with that next week. All right? Thanks very much for your time and your participation.
Only because I go